Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. A poor girl pretends to be ugly on a blind date, but a millionaire CEO challenges her and asks her to marry him. Lila, this is social suicide. I'm going to get arrested for crimes against common sense, said Emma, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her lips were smudged with dark brown lipstick, messily applied. Her cheeks were far too pink. The large orange glasses covered half her face, and the messy bun on top of her head looked like it had been done by a hurricane in a hurry. On the bed, Clara was trying not to laugh as she applied crooked eyeliner. You look amazing, just the way my mom would never imagine. And remind me again, why am I going on a blind date with a billionaire CEO in your place? Because I love my boyfriend, and I'm way too much of a coward to tell my parents that. So you're going instead. Scare the guy off for me and get a fancy dinner out of it. It's what we call a win-win. You bribed me with $90, Emma replied, crossing her arms. That's what I call emotional blackmail. Oh, come on. You said yourself you needed the cash. All you have to do is show up, say a few weird things, and you're done. A guy like that will run the second you say your first awkward hello. Emma said. For months, she had been juggling culinary school, working part-time at bakeries, pulling night shifts at a cafe, and selling sweets on the street. On top of that, she was taking care of her sick mom and trying to pretend life was under control. A little extra money and a free 5-star dinner didn't sound too bad. Promise me that if this goes wrong, you'll defend me when your mom finds out. I'll defend you with claws, teeth, and blue eyeshadow. Emma took a deep breath. This is going to end in disaster. Or in free wine at a fancy restaurant, Clara replied with a grin. Minutes later, Emma got out of the taxi in front of a 5-star restaurant on the Upper East Side. She was wearing a puffy sleeve dress that looked like it came from a costume thrift store, low shoes with colorful socks, and the same messy bun on her head. When she walked in, a waiter hesitated slightly. Name? This is Lila Dart, she answered automatically. She blinked. Shoot. She almost forgot the act. Right this way, please. In a quiet corner of the dining room, a man was waiting. Dark, spotless suit, hands folded on the table, an expression that looked both bored and completely in control. He stood up as soon as he saw her. Tall, elegant, with a face that looked like it had been sculpted by a Renaissance artist. Emma swallowed hard. Of course he has to look like a cursed prince from cable television. Miss Lila? He asked, reaching out his hand. That depends. If you're selling encyclopedias, I'm her twin sister. James raised an eyebrow and gave a small smile. James Carter. I don't sell encyclopedias, just companies. Emma shook his hand and sat down, cringing at the loud sound her dress made against the leather chair. And I just sell desserts in little jars. I guess we're even. He looked at her with curiosity. So, you sell desserts? And you're Ambassador Dwart's daughter? Emma froze for a second. Yes, but I was raised by very free-spirited nannies. I grew up learning the value of a good chocolate truffle. James nodded slowly. Admirable. The waiter arrived with the menu. Emma scanned it and whispered, Is there anything that comes in a jar? I recommend the salmon with passion fruit reduction, the waiter offered. Reduction? I like my passion fruit in full force. If you've got something that explodes with passion fruit, let me know. James laughed for the first time. I think I'll have the same as her. She glanced at him, suspicious. You like passion fruit explosions? I like women who are real, even when they look like they walked out of a psychedelic musical. Emma squinted. Was that a compliment? Still deciding, he replied, amused. Emma decided to step up her game. I snore. I talk in my sleep, and I have existential crises about ants. Fascinating. I love eccentric people, he said seriously. She leaned forward. I'm way too ugly for you. You should go out with someone prettier. I've dated pretty women. I'm tired of them. I want someone truly ugly. She froze. That made no sense. Why are you doing this? Are you messing with me? James set the menu down and looked straight at her. On the contrary, I'm enjoying this. It's rare to meet someone who actually surprises me. Emma crossed her arms. Suspicious. You're either a psychopath, or you've got some very weird kink. Neither, he answered calmly. But maybe I just have a thing for people who don't try to impress me. Her eyes widened. Dinner moved along at an unusual pace. Emma was making up stories about her rebellious childhood in the Patagonian desert. She said she was an expert at recognizing pigeons by their accents, and that her greatest talent was whistling songs from the 1932nd. Instead of pulling away, James seemed more and more intrigued. You are one of a kind, he said as he tasted dessert. Dessert? I like that. I'm a rare piece, one of a kind, undervalued in the market of normal people, she said, resting her chin on her hand. But you seem like an executive who knows exactly what he'll be doing 10 years from now. Is that a bad thing? It's boring. You strike me as the type who even schedules your dreams. Maybe that's why I'm here. Someone told me you were surprising. Emma choked on her water. Who told you that? Your mother, or rather, Lila's mother? He said with a slight smile. Her eyes widened. He knew? No? Impossible. Oh, she talks too much, she said, trying to keep her cool. But I'm just a simple girl with big ambitions and questionable taste in clothes. James looked at her for a few seconds. I like you. Like this. Emma raised an eyebrow. Like what? Strange, unexpected, completely different from the norm. She laughed. Good to know I'm standing out. He leaned in a little. Would you have dinner with me again? Emma nearly choked again. When James asked about a second date, she had spent the entire evening trying to be as strange as possible, and he still wanted to see her again. Are you serious? She asked, adjusting her orange glasses that kept slipping. Completely serious, James replied with that smile that was starting to make her nervous. In fact, I have a proposal for you. Emma frowned, suspicious. What kind of proposal? James leaned back in his chair, studying her with eyes that seemed to see more than she wanted him to. You're trying to look unattractive on purpose, aren't you? Emma froze. She tried to keep a straight face, but her cheeks were getting warm. I don't know what you're talking about. I always dress like this, she lied nervously, fiddling with her messy bun. Emma, he said gently, for the first time using her real name instead of Lila. I built an empire by observing people. I know when someone's putting on an act. Her eyes widened. How did he know her real name? I don't. The smudged lipstick. Done on purpose. The glasses that clearly aren't your prescription. The dress you chose specifically to look tacky, he listed calmly. All very carefully designed to scare people off. Emma felt like she'd been caught red-handed. Her first instinct was to run. But something in his voice made her stay. And if it's true? She asked defiantly. You going to turn me into the fashion police? James laughed. A real laugh that made something shift in her stomach. On the contrary, I thought it was brilliant and fun. Fun? Emma couldn't believe what she was hearing. Very. It's been a long time since someone surprised me like this. He leaned forward. That's why I want to make you a bet. What kind of bet? 3 dates. You can show up however you want. Do whatever you want to scare me off. If you manage to make me give up, I'll pay you $5,000. Emma nearly fell off her chair. $5,000? That's right. But if I don't give up by the end of the 3rd date, you tell me the truth about who you really are. Emma was quiet for a few seconds, processing the offer. $5,000 would solve a lot of problems. It could cover her mom's doctor visits, the overdue bills, maybe even let her cut back on work to focus on her studies. But at the same time, something about this man made her uneasy, like he could see through every one of her masks. Why would you do this? She asked. Because you intrigue me, and because it's been a long time since I met someone who didn't want something from me. How do you know I don't want anything? Because you're doing everything you can to push me away, he said simply. Most women do the opposite. Emma bit her lip, thinking. It was a tempting offer, but also a risky one. What if he found out too much? What if things got out of hand? Can I set a few rules? She asked finally. Of course. First, you can't look into my personal life. Second, the dates have to be in public places. Third, If I say I want to leave, you let me go. No questions asked. Agreed, he said right away. Anything else? Emma thought for a moment. One more thing. You have to promise you won't try to kiss me or do anything romantic. This is just a social experiment. James smiled, and this time the smile reached his eyes. I promise I won't do anything you're not comfortable with. She held out her hand. Then, we have a deal, Mr. Carter. He shook her hand, and Emma felt a jolt of electricity shoot up her arm. She quickly pulled her hand back. So, when's the second date? She asked, trying to sound professional. Tomorrow night. There's a street food festival in Central Park. Seems like the kind of place where you'd feel comfortable being weird. Emma nodded, already planning in her head how to take her character up a notch. Perfect. I'll show you what being truly unbearable looks like. I'm looking forward to it, James said. And for the first time, she realized he meant it. In the cab ride home, Emma took off her orange glasses and rubbed her eyes. What on earth had just happened? She had gone on the date planning to be rejected, and somehow ended up with a $5,000 deal to keep being rejected. And worst of all, for one brief moment, when James had smiled for real, she had completely forgotten she was acting. When she got home, Clara was waiting anxiously in the living room. Well, how did it go? Did he run off after 10 minutes? Emma flopped down on the couch, still trying to process everything. Not exactly. What do you mean, not exactly? Emma, you looked like a psychedelic scarecrow. He liked it, Emma said, still in disbelief. And he asked for 2 more dates. Clara's eyes widened. He liked it? What kind of person likes someone dressed like a psychedelic scarecrow? Apparently, James Carter, Emma sighed. Clara, I think I got myself into something way bigger than I expected. Why? What happened? Emma told her about the 3-date proposal and the $5,000. Clara's jaw dropped. $5,000? Emma, that's a fortune. You have to say yes. He already did, Emma replied. But there's something strange about him. It's like he knew exactly what I was doing from the start. Maybe he's just really smart. Or maybe he's a charming psycho, Clara shrugged. Either way, $5,000 is $5,000. Emma nodded. But part of her couldn't stop thinking about the way James had looked at her when he said she intrigued him, like she was a puzzle he wanted to solve. And the most unsettling part was that for a brief moment, she had wanted to be solved. That night, Emma stayed up late, planning her strategy for the second date. She needed to be even weirder, even more unbearable, because the more she thought about James Carter and his mysterious smile, the more she realized she was in dangerous territory. $5,000 was a lot of money, but she was starting to suspect she might end up paying a much higher price than she expected. Emma spent the whole afternoon getting ready for the second date like it was a military operation. This time, she went all in. A pink and purple striped jumpsuit from a thrift store, bright yellow rain boots, 3 beaded necklaces in wild colors, and a straw hat with fake flowers glued on. Oh my God, Emma, you look like a rainbow exploded, Clara said, watching her friend apply green eyeshadow and blue lipstick. Perfect. If this doesn't make him give up, nothing will, Emma replied, putting on a 3rd coat of mascara that made her eyelashes look like spider legs. Are you sure you even want to win this bet? Clara asked, frowning. Honestly, it seems like you're trying a little too hard. Emma paused and looked at her friend in the mirror. Of course I want to win. It's 5, 0. Clara, enough money for me to stop worrying for a few months. But what if you're starting to like him? Impossible, Emma said too quickly. I barely know him. And he's, I don't know, too rich, too polished, completely out of my world. Sometimes the most unlikely people are the ones who surprise us the most, Clara said, but Emma was already heading out the door. The street food festival in Central Park was packed. Families wandered between food stalls, couples shared churros, and groups of friends tried exotic dishes. Emma felt completely out of place in her over-the-top outfit, but she tried to stay confident. She found James near a Mexican taco stand. He was wearing a light blue dress shirt and dark jeans, casual for him, but still flawless. When he saw her approaching, his face lit up with an amused smile. Wow, he said, looking her up and down. You've really outdone yourself. You look like a flamingo that decided to go hippie." Emma crossed her arms, pretending to be offended. "It's European street fashion. You clearly don't understand artistic innovation." "Clearly, I'm very old-fashioned," he said, pretending to be serious. "Forgive me for not recognizing genius when I see it." They started walking through the stalls. Emma had planned to be even more eccentric than on the first date, so she began commenting on everything with ridiculous observations. "Look at those hot dogs," she said, pointing to a stand. "I bet they have inferiority complexes for being served in cheap buns. I always talk to my food before eating it to thank it for its sacrifice." "Very noble of you," James replied with a straight face. "I imagine that causes some awkward moments in fancy restaurants. Once, I got kicked out of a nice place for saying a 5-minute prayer to a grilled fish she made up. The waiter thought I was having a breakdown." James laughed out loud, a genuine laugh that made a few people turn to look at them. "You're impossible," he said, shaking his head. "Now you're getting it," Emma replied, pleased. They stopped at a crepe stand. Emma ordered one with Nutella, banana, and marshmallow, while James went for something simpler. While they waited, she started dancing awkwardly to the background music. "This is the traditional dance of my people," she said, moving her arms in an uncoordinated way. "And who are your people?" James asked, clearly entertained. "The people who can't dance but try anyway." He laughed again, and Emma felt something stir in her chest. Making someone laugh like that felt good. Really good. When their crepes were ready, they found a bench near the lake to sit and eat. Emma kept up her quirky comments but started noticing that James didn't just laugh. He also came up with clever and funny remarks of his own. "Look at those ducks," he said, pointing toward the lake. "They look like stressed-out executives rushing to important meetings." Emma laughed and watched the ducks swimming quickly. "You're right. That one's definitely late for a big presentation on breadcrumbs. And that other one's having an existential crisis about swimming in circles all day," James added. For a moment, Emma forgot she was acting. Talking to him was easy, even natural. He had a dry sense of humor that matched hers perfectly, even when she wasn't trying to be funny on purpose. "Can I ask you something?" James said suddenly. Emma became alert. "Depends on the question. Why did you really agree to do this? Don't give me the money excuse. There are easier ways to earn $5,000. Emma chewed her crepe slowly, thinking, part of her wanted to tell the truth, that she needed the money to help her mother, that she was juggling 3 jobs, that she sometimes woke up at night worried about the bills. But that would break the act. "Maybe I like a challenge," she said finally. "And maybe I'm curious to see how much you can handle. What if I said I'm enjoying this more with each minute?" She almost choked on the crepe. "Then I'd say you have very strange taste." "I do," he agreed, looking directly into her eyes. "I've always liked things that are unique, unexpected, things that make me question what I thought I knew." Emma felt her face get warm. There was something about the way he spoke that made her stomach do flips. "You're trying to throw me off," she said, trying to stay in control. "I'm trying to get to know you," he corrected. They sat in silence for a few seconds, watching people walk by. Emma realized that for the first time in a long while, she was relaxed. She wasn't thinking about bills, school, or problems at home. She was just present. "Want to check out the street performers?" James asked, pointing to a small crowd near a fountain. "Only if you promise not to try copying any of them," Emma said. "No promises," he replied with a mischievous smile. They walked over and found a group of musicians playing jazz. Emma started swaying to the rhythm, and to her surprise, James joined in. It wasn't formal dancing, just 2 adults moving clumsily to the music, laughing at themselves. "You dance worse than I do," Emma said, watching James try a fancier step. "Impossible. You said you're from the people who can't dance. At least I have a cultural excuse." When the music ended, they clapped along with the rest of the audience. Emma noticed that several people had been watching them dance, some even smiling at the clearly happy couple. "I think we just became a tourist attraction," she said. "Better than being just another couple of bored New Yorkers," James replied. As they walked back through the park, Emma realized something had changed. What had started as a game, a way to make easy money, was turning into something else. She was actually enjoying herself, and worse, she was starting to like James's company. "About the third date," he said as they neared the park exit. "What about it? You choose the place. Anywhere you want. Anytime you want. The only condition is that it's tomorrow night." Emma looked at him, suspicious. "Why the rush?" "Because I'm curious to see what else you've got up your sleeve. And because," he stopped walking and looked her straight in the eye, "because I'm enjoying this game a lot more than I should." Emma's heartbeat quickened. There was something in his voice, in the way he looked at her, that made her forget all about the money, the bet, everything. "I'll think about it," she said, trying to keep her composure. "Great. But Emma, yes. Thank you for today. It's been a long time since I've had this much fun." As the taxi took her home, Emma took off her straw hat and leaned her head against the window. Her plan to be unbearable was failing miserably. Worse than that, she was starting to care what James thought of her. The real her, not the character she was pretending to be. And for the first time since it all began, Emma wondered what would happen if she simply dropped all the masks and showed who she really was. That thought scared her more than any costume she could come up with. Emma had chosen a small cafe in Greenwich Village for the third date. It was a cozy place with rustic wooden tables and plants hanging from the ceiling. She arrived 10 minutes early, wearing an orange vintage dress with blue polka dots, striped socks, and 2 mismatched shoes. The barista looked at her curiously when she ordered a double cappuccino with vanilla syrup and 3 sugar cubes. "It's to keep my eccentric energy up," Emma explained, sitting at a table by the window. James arrived promptly at 7, as elegant as ever in a white shirt and navy blazer. When he saw her, he smiled in that now familiar way, a mix of amusement and something she couldn't quite read. "You managed to look even more colorful," he said, kissing her hand theatrically. "You look like a Picasso painting come to life." Picasso painted weird cubes. "I prefer to think of myself as a drunk Monet," Emma replied with mock seriousness. They ordered pie and coffee, and for a few minutes kept the conversation light. Emma told made-up stories about her adventures as a subversive art critic, while James asked questions that seemed genuinely interested. "Have you ever thought about writing a book about your artistic theories?" he asked, slicing into his apple pie. "I've started one. It's called How to Annoy Sophisticated People in 10 Easy Street Eps," Emma answered without missing a beat. "It would be a bestseller," he said, and she almost believed he meant it. That's when Emma noticed a woman approaching their table, tall, blonde, dressed in a designer outfit that probably cost more than Emma's rent for 3 months. She had that polished kind of beauty that comes with weekly manicures and a personal trainer. "James," the woman said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "what a surprise to see you here." James looked up, and Emma noticed his expression change slightly. It wasn't fear or embarrassment, more like quiet resignation. "Isabel," he said calmly. "Emma, this is Isabel Langston." "Isabel, Emma." Isabel held out her hand to Emma with a smile that was anything but friendly. "So, you're the artist everyone's been talking about," she said, stressing the word artist like it was something unpleasant. Emma shook her hand, immediately sensing the tension in the air. "Artist is a generous word. I think of myself more as a public disturbance," she replied, trying to keep the tone light. Isabel gave a cold laugh. "How interesting. And how long have you two known each other?" "A few days," James answered before Emma could speak. "Oh, a few days," Isabel repeated, as if that explained something. James has always had peculiar tastes. I remember when he went through a phase of collecting street art. It lasted about a month. Emma felt a flash of irritation. She didn't like being compared to a phase. "And you?" Emma asked, deciding to push back. "What kind of art do you enjoy?" "Real art," Isabel replied, smiling sweetly but with venom. "Paintings that actually have value. Not those youthful expressions by people who sell candy on the street." Emma's blood ran cold. How did Isabel know about the candy? James was watching the exchange closely but didn't step in. That made Emma even more uncomfortable. "Excuse me," Emma said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Oh, I'm sorry," Isabella replied, finding innocence. "I thought you knew. People talk. New York may feel like a big city, but social circles are small. especially when someone different shows up on the radar. "Isabel," James said at last, his voice carrying a warning tone. "What?" "I'm just making conversation," she said, but her eyes sparkled with malice. It's so rare to see James with someone so authentic, someone who actually has to work for a living. Emma felt her face grow hot. The implication was clear. Isabel knew exactly who she was and was trying to expose her in front of James. "Well," Emma said, forcing a smile, "at least my job helps make people's day a little sweeter." "Literally." "How noble," Isabel answered. "And creative too. The disguise, I mean, very theatrical." This time, it was Emma who was left speechless. Isabel clearly knew about the disguise as well. But how? James was still watching, and Emma started to wonder if he was enjoying this or if he had planned the whole thing. "Well, it was a pleasure meeting you, Emma," Isabel said, picking up her designer purse. "James, we'll talk later. I'm sure we have plenty to catch up on." She walked away, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume and tension. Emma stayed quiet for a few seconds, trying to process what had just happened. Then she turned to James. "Did you know she was going to be here?" "No," he replied calmly. "But I'm not surprised. How does she know about me? About the sweets? The disguise?" James sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Isabel has resources, and when she wants to know something about someone, she usually finds out." "And you?" Emma asked, her voice colder now. "What do you know about me? I know you work 3 different jobs. I know you sell handmade sweets on weekends near Washington Square Park. I know you study culinary arts at night, and that your mother is sick." Emma felt like she had been punched in the stomach. "You investigated me," she said, not as a question but a statement. "Not exactly," James replied. "But when someone catches my interest, I tend to look into them." Emma stood up abruptly, knocking over her coffee cup. "This is a violation of my privacy and of the rules we agreed on." "Emma, wait." "No," she said, grabbing her bag. "This has gone too far. You knew who I was from the beginning, didn't you? You've been playing with me this whole time." "That's not how it is." "Then how is it?" she demanded, crossing her arms. "Do you get a kick out of mocking poor people? Is that what rich people do when they're bored?" For the first time since they met, James looked genuinely shaken. "No, Emma, you don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," she said, her eyes burning with angry tears. "You and your rich, snobby ex-girlfriend decided to have some fun with the poor girl who sells candy. What a funny story to tell at your fancy dinners." "Emma, that's not true." But she was already walking out of the cafe, hearing him call her name but never looking back. Out on the sidewalk, Emma paused for a moment, trying to catch her breath. Her heart was racing, and she felt exposed, like all her masks had been torn off at once. The worst part was that for a few moments over the last few days, she had started to believe James might actually be interested in her, that he saw something special in her despite all the ridiculous disguises. But now she saw it for what it really was, just a cruel game played by bored rich people. As she walked toward the subway, Emma took off her mismatched shoes and threw them in a trash can. She was tired of pretending to be someone she wasn't, and she was tired of believing in fairy tales. What she didn't see was James stepping out of the cafe just behind her, stopping on the sidewalk and watching her walk away with a look on his face that mixed frustration, regret, and something that looked very much like pain. Emma spent the next 3 days avoiding any place where she might run into James. She canceled her candy stand schedule at Washington Square Park, changed her route to school, and even avoided some of her favorite work spots. But on Thursday morning, she found an envelope under her apartment door. Inside was an elegant invitation to a charity auction at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, along with a handwritten note. "Emma, I know you have every reason to be upset with me, but this event supports a cause I think you'd care about. Free medical treatment for low-income families. If you want to go, I'll be there. If you don't want to see me, at least consider going for the cause. J." On the back, he had added, "P.S. No need to dress weirdly unless you want to." Emma read the note several times, sitting in the small kitchen of the apartment she shared with 2 other girls. Her first instinct was to tear up the invitation and throw it away. But the words free medical treatment made her stop. Her mother had canceled 3 doctor's appointments last month because of money. If there was even a small chance that this event could help people in the same situation, maybe it was worth going. But what would she wear to a charity auction? She called Clara, who showed up an hour later with 3 borrowed dresses and a determined look on her face. "You're finally going to dress like a normal person," Clara said, holding up a simple but elegant navy blue dress. "This one's perfect." "I don't know if this is a good idea," Emma said, eyeing the dress. "What if he thinks I'm going because of him? And what if you are?" "I'm not," Emma replied a little too quickly. "Emma, you've been grumpy for 3 days straight, like a wet cat. Either you're going because you want to see him, or because you're in love with the idea of free health care. And considering you faint at the sight of blood, I think we both know the answer." Emma sighed. Clara was right, as usual. He looked into my life, Clara. He knew who I was the whole time. I felt like an idiot. "Or maybe he cared enough to want to know more about you," Clara suggested, helping Emma try on the dress. "Look, I get that it feels intrusive, but think about it. How often does a millionaire CEO bother to look into someone's life? This isn't just a game to him." The dress fit Emma perfectly. She looked at herself in the mirror and almost didn't recognize the person staring back without the quirky outfits or dramatic makeup. She looked normal, pretty even. "I don't know how to act like myself," she admitted. "Just be yourself with more confidence," Clara said, adjusting Emma's hair. "And remember, if he does anything you don't like, you can walk away at any time." The Metropolitan Museum had been transformed for the event. Soft lighting illuminated the artwork, while waiters moved around with champagne and elegant appetizers. Emma immediately felt out of place but tried to keep a confident posture. She spent about 20 minutes looking at the auction pieces and reading about the causes they supported when she sensed a familiar presence behind her. "You came," James said, his voice a mix of surprise and relief. Emma turned slowly. He wore a flawless tuxedo and had a cautious expression, like someone approaching a wounded animal. "I came for the cause," she said, keeping her tone neutral. "Not for you." "I understand," he said, but a small smile formed at the corners of his mouth. "You look beautiful." Emma felt her face grow warm but tried to keep her composure. "Thank you. You look normal for your standards." They stood silently for a few seconds, looking at an abstract painting on the wall. "Emma, about what happened at the cafe, I don't want to talk about it," she cut in. "At least not here." "All right," he said, "but may I show you a few of the pieces? There are some I think you might like." Emma hesitated. Part of her wanted to keep her distance, but another part was curious to see the event through his eyes. "Only if you promise not to try and impress me with fancy art talk." "I promise to stick to basic and occasionally clueless observations," he said, offering his arm. They walked through the exhibits, and Emma was surprised to find that James had genuine and thoughtful things to say about the art. He wasn't pretentious or condescending. He seemed truly interested in hearing what she thought about each piece. "This one reminds me of you," he said, stopping in front of a colorful and slightly chaotic painting. "Why? Because it's weird and makes no sense? Because it's vibrant, unexpected, and makes people stop and look twice," he said, looking at her. "And because it has layers, you only notice if you really pay attention." Emma felt something shift in her chest. There was sincerity in his voice that made her question the walls she put up. "James, I need to know," she said suddenly. "Why did you make that bet with me? What was the real reason?" He sighed and stepped slightly away from the painting. "Honestly, because you were the first person in years who didn't want anything from me. You were literally trying to get rid of me, and that was refreshing." "So, that was it? I was just an interesting pastime?" "At first, maybe," he admitted. "But it didn't take long for it to become something more." Before Emma could answer, music started playing, and James held out his hand. "Will you dance with me? I don't really know how to dance," she said. "What happened at the park was just me being silly." "Neither do I," he confessed. "But we can pretend we know how." Emma looked at his outstretched hand for a few seconds. She knew saying yes would be risky, that it meant letting her guard down even more, but there was something in his expression that made her want to try. "One dance," she said, taking his hand. "Just one." They moved to the small area that had been set up as a dance floor. James placed one hand on her waist and held the other with his. Emma could feel the warmth of his body through the thin fabric of her dress. "You're not stepping on my feet," she noted, trying to keep the mood light. Not yet, but the song just started. They danced in silence for a few moments, and Emma found herself relaxing in his arms. It was different from the casual hugs she gave her friends. There was an intimacy to it that made her feel both nervous and at ease. "Emma," James said softly, his voice close to her ear, "about Isabel. She was trying to get under your skin because she knows you mean something to me." Emma looked up to meet his eyes. "How could she know that when I don't even know?" "Because she's known me a long time, and she knows I've never brought anyone I really cared about to places where she might show up." Emma's heart sped up. There was something in the way he spoke that made her defenses start to fall. "James, That's when she tripped. Her low heel caught on the hem of her dress, and she lost her balance. James caught her immediately, pulling her against his chest to keep her from falling. For a moment, they stayed like that. Her leaning into him, their faces just inches apart. Emma could feel his breath, could see little golden flecks in his dark eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice slightly unsteady. Emma nodded, but didn't move away. There was something about the moment, about being so close, that made everything else disappear. The other people, the music, her worries about who he really was. It all faded. "Emma," he murmured, and she realized he was leaning slightly closer. For a second, she thought he was going to kiss her. And for a second, she wanted him to date. But then she remembered where they were, who they were, and she gently stepped back. "I should go," she said, trying to pull herself together. "You don't have to." "I do," she said, picking up the small purse she had left on a nearby table. "Thank you for the dance and for the invitation, Emma. Wait." But she was already walking away, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it across the room. In the taxi ride home, Emma rested her head against the cold window and closed her eyes. Something was happening between her and James, something far beyond the original bet, and that scared her more than any costume she had ever worn. Because for the first time in a long time, she was starting to truly care about someone, and people like her didn't end up with happy endings next to millionaire CEOs. When she got home, she found a message on her phone. "Thank you for coming. You looked beautiful without any disguise. Jay." Emma stared at the message for a long time before deleting it, but not before smiling. Emma woke up Friday morning to the phone ringing nonstop. It was 6 o'clock loom. And only one person would call at that hour. "Mom," she answered quickly, her chest tightening. "Emma, honey, I need to go to the hospital today," said Maria, her mother, trying to keep her voice calm. The pain came back during the night. Emma sat up in bed, now fully awake. "I'll come get you. Don't leave the house. You don't have to miss work because of me. Mom, don't even think about it. I'll be there in 40 minutes. Emma got dressed quickly and took the subway to Queens, where her mom lived in a small one-bedroom apartment. On the way, she did the math in her head about her savings. Even with the extra jobs and candy sales, it was barely enough to cover a private appointment. She found Maria sitting in the little kitchen, dressed and ready, but her face was pale, and her hands were shaking slightly. "How are you feeling?" Emma asked, kissing her mom's forehead. "Better than I was during the night," Maria lied. "But I think I should talk to the doctor." At the public hospital, they waited 4 hours before being seen. Emma looked around at the other families in the same situation, clearly worried people trying to figure out if they could afford the tests, choosing between healthcare and basic bills. When they were finally called in, the doctor got straight to the point. "We need to run some additional tests. The basic plan doesn't cover everything, so it would be about $800 out of pocket." Emma felt her stomach drop. $800 was nearly 2 months of savings. "There's no other option?" she asked. "I can refer you through the public system, but the wait would be about 2 months. Emma looked at her mother, who was trying to be brave but had fear written all over her face. "We'll go private," Emma decided. "I'll find a way to get the money." After scheduling the tests for the following Monday, Emma took her mother home and then headed straight to Washington Square Park. She needed to sell as many sweets as she could in the next few days. She set up her small makeshift stand, full of Tupperware containers packed with brigadeiros, beignets, and coconut treats. It was a sunny Saturday, so foot traffic was good. She had sold about half her stock when she noticed someone taking pictures of her from a distance. A well-dressed woman with a professional camera was clearly photographing Emma and her stand. When she realized she'd been spotted, the woman quickly walked away. Emma felt a chill in her stomach. Something wasn't right. She kept selling, trying to ignore the feeling of being watched. By around 4:00 the afternoon, she had made nearly $200. A good day, but still far from what she needed. That's when she saw James walking toward her. He was wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt, but even dressed casually, he was hard to miss. Emma felt a mix of happiness and panic at the sight of him. "Hi," he said, stopping in front of her stand. "Can I buy some sweets?" "Of course," Emma replied, trying to keep her voice professional. "What would you like?" "A bit of everything," he said, handing her a $50 bill. "And keep the change." "James." "No. Emma. Please let me help." She looked at him for a few seconds. There was honesty in his eyes, but also something else, a sense of urgency. "Why are you here?" she asked, putting the sweets into a small bag. "Because I got something I think you should see." He showed her his phone. On the screen was a photo of her selling sweets with a nasty caption. "The CEO James Carter's latest flame. Does he know his girlfriend sells candy on the street?" Emma felt her face flush with anger and shame. "Isabel," she muttered. "She sent this to half of New York's high society," James said, putting the phone away. "Emma, I'm sorry." "For what?" she asked, crossing her arms. "You didn't do anything. And besides, it's true. I do sell candy on the street. But it's not about that, is it?" Emma cut in. "Then what is it about, James? The fact that you're being seen with someone from the wrong class? You know that's not it." Emma let out a bitter laugh. "Do I? Because every time we're together, I feel like I'm being tested. First, you make a bet with me like I'm some kind of project. Then I find out you looked into my life. And now your ex is spreading pictures of me, like I'm some kind of scandal. Emma, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," she said, starting to pack up her goods. "I understand that people like you and Isabel see people like me as entertainment. A little story to tell at your fancy dinners." James was quiet for a few moments, watching her pack. "Is your mom okay?" he asked suddenly. Emma stopped what she was doing and looked at him. "How did you know?" "Because I recognized that look. It's the same one I had when my grandmother was sick, and I didn't know how I'd pay for her treatments." Something in his voice made Emma pause. "You've been through that?" "My family didn't always have money, Emma. I built this company from nothing because I knew what it was like not to have choices." Emma studied him for a few seconds. There was something different in his tone, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "She needs some tests," she said at last. "Bobby, I don't have—" James pulled out his wallet, but Emma shook her head. "No, I won't take charity." "It's not charity. It's a loan, or we could call it advanced payment for the next 6 months of sweets." "James." "Emma, please let me help. Not out of pity, not out of guilt, but because I care." She looked at him, trying to read his intentions. There was sincerity in his eyes, but the image on his phone reminded her just how different their worlds were. "I need to think," she said, finishing packing her products. "Of course. But Emma, yes. Don't worry about what Isabel or anyone else thinks. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Easy for you to say when you have a bank account with a bunch of zeros. It wasn't always like that," he said gently. "And I never forgot what it feels like to be on the other side." Emma finished packing her things in silence. As she turned to leave, James gently held her arm. "Emma, there's something I need to tell you." "What is it?" "I knew who you were from our very first meeting. Not because I looked into you, but because—" He hesitated. "Because I had seen you before." Emma's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "About 2 months ago, I was walking through the park after a frustrating meeting. I saw you selling sweets and laughing with a little girl who didn't have money to buy anything. You gave her a chocolate treat for free and made up a story about how it had magical powers. Emma remembered the day. A little girl had stopped by her stand with only $50. I watched for about 10 minutes. James continued. You made every single customer smile. There was something about you, an energy, a light I'd never seen anything like it. Why didn't you say anything? Because I was just a guy in a suit in the park, and you looked free, happy. I didn't want to interrupt that. Emma felt tears sting her eyes. So, when Clara sent me in her place, I recognized you right away. But you were hiding behind that disguise, so I figured maybe you had your reasons. James, she whispered, unsure what to say. I fell in love with you that day in the park, Emma, with the real you. Everything else was just a way to get to know you better. The tears finally fell down Emma's face. She felt exposed, vulnerable, but also relieved to finally hear the truth. I don't know what to say, she admitted. You don't have to say anything right now, he said, gently wiping a tear from her cheek. But think about what I said regarding the loan. Your mom is more important than our pride. Emma nodded, still trying to process everything he had told her. I'll call you, she finally said. I'll be waiting. As she walked toward the subway, Emma felt like her world had turned upside down. The man she thought had been playing games with her had actually fallen for her before they had even really met. And now, she wasn't sure who was wearing a mask, him or her. Emma spent the entire weekend thinking about her conversation with James. His words kept echoing in her mind. I fell in love with you that day in the park. She kept trying to decide whether she should believe him or if it was just another carefully planned move. On Monday morning, she decided to accept the loan for her mother's medical exams. She called James, and he answered on the first ring. Emma, how are you? I'll accept your help, she said, swallowing her pride. But it's a loan. I'll pay it back with interest if necessary. No interest needed. Yes, it is. I want this to be a real transaction. There was a pause on the other end. All right, whatever you prefer. I can transfer the money right away. Thank you, she said softly. This means a lot to me. It means a lot to me too. It means you trust me. At least a little. After hanging up, Emma sat on her bed and finally let herself cry, not out of sadness, but relief. Her mother was going to be okay. That was all that mattered. The exams went well, and the doctor said it was just an inflammation that could be treated with medication. Emma felt like a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders. In the days that followed, she and James exchanged a few messages about her mother's health, but they didn't see each other. Emma had gone back to her usual routine. College, work, selling sweets, trying to sort through everything that had happened between them. Then Thursday came, and everything turned upside down again. Emma was in the college library when she received a call from an unknown number. Emma Martinez? A formal male voice asked. Yes, that's me. My name is Daniel Harris. I'm Mr. James Carter's personal assistant. He'd like to know if you're available for a meeting this afternoon. Emma frowned. Why was James having his assistant call her instead of calling himself? What kind of meeting, Mr. Carter prefers to explain in person. Would 5 o'clock at his office work for you? Emma hesitated. Going to James's office felt like crossing a line she wasn't sure she was ready to cross. Can he call me directly? Mr. Carter is in meetings all day, but he said it was important to speak with you today. Curiosity won over caution. All right, 5 o'clock. James's company building was impressive. All glass and steel, with a lobby that looked like it came straight out of an architecture magazine. Emma felt small and out of place as the elevator took her up to the 30th floor. James's assistant greeted her with a professional smile and led her to a meeting room with a panoramic view of Manhattan. Mr. Carter will be with you in a few minutes, she said, offering her water or coffee. Emma chose water and looked out the window, trying to calm her nerves. What could James want to talk about that was so important? When he entered the room, he was back to being formal. Dark suit. Business posture. But there was something different in his eyes, a kind of hesitation she wasn't used to seeing. Emma, thank you for coming, he said, closing the door behind him. Your assistant said it was important. It is. He sat down across the table, putting a formal distance between them. "I have a proposal for you." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Another bet?" "Not exactly." James laced his fingers together on the table. "It's more like a job." "What kind of job?" James took a deep breath, as if preparing for something difficult. "My grandmother is very sick. The doctors say she doesn't have much time, and she has this obsession. She wants to see me married before she dies." Emma felt her stomach sink. "James, what are you suggesting? She's coming to stay with me for a week. I need someone to pretend to be my fiancé." The silence in the room was deafening. Emma looked at him like he had lost his mind. "You want me to pretend to be your fiancé for 1 week? You'd be well paid, of course." "Woo, sure, Ling." Emma almost choked on her water. $50,000. It's a fair amount for what I'm asking. You'd have to stay at my place, attend a few social events, and convince my grandmother that we're a happy couple. Emma stood up suddenly and began pacing the room. "This is crazy, James. You're talking about faking an engagement. I know how it sounds. It sounds like you're hiring me to be an actress in your personal life." She turned to face him. "That's exactly what you're doing, isn't it?" James stood up too, looking frustrated. "Emma, my grandmother is dying. She raised me after my parents died in an accident. She's the only family I have left. If pretending to be engaged for a week can give her peace, I'd do anything." Emma's anger softened a little when she heard the pain in his voice. "Why me? Why not ask Isabel or someone else from your social circle?" "Because she wouldn't approve of them," James said simply. "My grandmother has an incredible sense for knowing when people are being fake. She'd see right through anyone I brought just for convenience. And with me, it would be different." James looked at her closely. "Yes, it would be different. Why? Because with you, I don't have to pretend I enjoy your company." Emma felt her face grow warm. There was a sincerity in his voice that left her unsure of what to say. "James, this is all way too complicated. We barely know each other." "I know, but you're the only person who can help me with this." Emma sat back down, trying to process the proposal. $50,000 would solve all her financial problems. She could stop working so many hours, focus on school, take better care of her mother. What kind of social events? A few dinners, maybe a charity event. Nothing too complicated. And where would I stay? I have a house in the Upper East Side with separate bedrooms. You'd have complete privacy. Emma bit her lip, thinking, "Can I ask a few questions?" "Of course. First, does your grandmother know about our unusual situation?" "She doesn't know anything about the bets or the strange dates. As far as she knows, we met and fell in love." "Second, what if she doesn't believe us? Then we do our best. And at least she'll know I tried." "Third, what happens after the week?" James hesitated for the first time. "After the week, we go back to our normal lives." There was something in the way he said that which made Emma feel he wasn't being entirely honest. But maybe that was just her imagination. "I need time to think." "How much time?" "Until tomorrow." "It's a big decision." James nodded. "Of course. But Emma, yes. Thank you for at least considering it. I know it's a lot to ask." Emma grabbed her purse and headed to the door. Just before leaving, she turned around. "James, your grandmother. She really means a lot to you." "Everything," he answered without hesitation. "She means everything to me." That night, Emma called Clara and told her about the proposal. Clara was silent for a few seconds before bursting out. $50,000 to pretend to be a fiancé for a week? "Emma, you have to say yes." "It's not just about the money, Clara. It's complicated." "What do you mean complicated? What if I start to believe it's real? What if I actually fall in love?" Clara was quiet for a moment. "Oh," she finally said, "you're already falling for him?" "No, I'm not," Emma replied. "Emma, you're afraid of pretending to be his fiancée because deep down you're afraid you won't want to pretend anymore." Emma didn't answer. Clara had hit the mark. What should I do? Say yes to the proposal, but this time, go in with your eyes open. No masks, no games. Just be yourself. What if everything goes wrong? What if everything goes right? That night, Emma stayed up late, staring at the ceiling. In the morning, she called James. "I'll do it," she said, "but on one condition." "What is it?" "No pretending between us. If we're going to convince your grandmother we're a real couple, we have to actually get to know each other." "Deal," he said right away. "When can you start?" "This afternoon." "But James—" "Yes. If you're lying about your grandmother or anything else, I'm walking away on the spot." "Understood." "And Emma—" "Yeah. Thank you. You have no idea how much this means to me." After she hung up, Emma looked at her reflection in the mirror. In a few days, she'd be living in James Carter's house, pretending to be his fiancée. Emma arrived at James's house with a small suitcase and a growing sense that she'd made a huge mistake. The mansion on the Upper East Side was even more impressive than she had imagined. 3 floors of understated elegance, perfectly kept gardens, and an entrance that looked like something out of a movie. James met her at the door, wearing a light blue shirt and khaki pants. He looked nervous, which was oddly reassuring. "You came," he said, like he still couldn't believe it. "I said I would," Emma replied, adjusting the strap on her suitcase. "Let me show you around," he said, taking her bag. "My grandmother arrives tomorrow morning." The house felt like a private museum. Expensive paintings on the walls, furniture that probably cost more than Emma's entire apartment, and a grand staircase leading to the upper floors. It was beautiful but cold. "Your room is this way," James said, walking upstairs. "It has a private bathroom and a nice view of the garden." The room was bigger than Emma's whole living room. King-size bed, dark wood furniture, and huge windows overlooking a courtyard with a fountain. "It's beautiful," she said, genuinely impressed. "But James, I feel like I'm trespassing in a museum." He laughed, seeming to relax a little. "I know. I feel that way sometimes too. I bought this house because I thought it was the kind of place successful people were supposed to live, but it's never really felt like home. Where does feel like home to you?" James paused, like no one had ever asked him that before. "Honestly, my office, or that coffee shop where we met. Places where I can just be myself, instead of what people expect me to be." Emma studied him. There was a vulnerability in his answer that surprised her. "Well, then let's pretend this house is a fancy cafe," she said, sitting on the bed. "Now tell me about your grandmother. What does she need to know about our love story? Her name is Margaret Carter. She's 83, sharp as a tack, and doesn't fall for lies easily," James said, settling into an armchair by the window. "She'll want to know how we met, how long we've been together, when we decided to get married. And what's our official story? I was thinking we keep it close to the truth. We met a few months ago. You were selling sweets, and I fell for your unique personality. And she won't think it's strange that you're dating someone who sells candy on the street. My grandmother doesn't care about social status. She cares about character." Emma nodded, but a worry lingered in her mind. "James, what if she finds out we're pretending?" "Then at least we tried," he said simply. "But Emma, the less we pretend, the better. She has a sixth sense for anything fake." That evening, they had dinner in the formal dining room, a surreal experience for Emma, who was used to eating at her kitchen counter. James was thoughtful, asking about her family, her education, her dreams. It felt like a real first date, no games, no bets. "Can I ask you something personal?" Emma said as she cut into the salmon James's private chef had prepared. "Of course. Why have you never actually gotten married? I mean, you're 32, successful, good-looking." James laughed. "You think I'm good-looking?" Emma felt her face flush. "Don't change the subject." "All right," he said seriously. "Honestly, I've never met someone who wanted me for who I really am, instead of what I represent. The women in my social circle want the CEO, the status, the money. You were the first person who actively tried to get rid of me. And that was attractive." "Extremely," he said, looking straight into her eyes, "because it meant you didn't want anything from me, and that gave me the freedom to be myself." They were interrupted by the doorbell. James frowned. "I'm not expecting anyone." A few minutes later, the housekeeper walked to the dining room with a slightly uncomfortable look. "Mister." "Carter, Miss Isabel Langston is here. She says it's important." James sighed. "Let her in." Isabel entered, wearing a black designer dress and a look that was a mix of curiosity and irritation. When she saw Emma, her lips curved into a smile that was anything but friendly. "James, darling," she said, kissing his cheek possessively, "I need to talk to you. It's about tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" "The Whitmore Foundation charity event. Did you forget you confirmed as my guest?" Emma felt her stomach drop. James looked genuinely surprised. "Isabel, I didn't confirm anything. And besides, I can't go. My grandmother's arriving. Your grandmother will understand. This event is important for business." Isabel glanced at Emma like she was an inconvenience. "I'm sure your friend will understand." "Actually," Emma said, standing up, "his fiancée won't understand." Silence fell instantly. Isabel's eyes widened. "Excuse me?" Emma looked at James, who seemed surprised but not unhappy about the announcement. "James and I are engaged," Emma said, raising her left hand, where she had placed a simple ring she brought from home. "So, I guess you'll need to find someone else to go with you." Isabel looked from Emma's hand to James and back again. "This is ridiculous," she said finally. "James, you can't be serious." "I'm completely serious," James said, standing and moving beside Emma. "Emma and I are getting married." "When?" Isabel demanded. "Because just last week, you were single." "Things changed quickly," Emma replied before James could speak. "Sometimes, when you meet the right person, you just know." Isabel laughed, but it was a cold laugh. "The right person, honey? You have no idea what kind of world you're stepping into. You think you can just show up and fit into his life, into our world." Emma felt her irritation rise. "Our world? I didn't realize there were requirements to fall in love with someone." "There are," Isabel stepped closer, her voice sharper. "There are dinners where you won't know which fork to use, conversations about art, politics, and business you won't be able to follow. There are expectations for how a CEO's wife should act." "Isabel," James said, his tone warning. "No, James. Someone has to tell her the truth." Isabel looked at Emma with disdain. "You may be a sweet girl and all that, but this isn't a fairy tale. This is real life. And in real life, people from different worlds don't work." Emma felt like she had just been slapped. All her insecurities rose to the surface. "Maybe you're right," she said quietly. "Maybe I really don't know what kind of world I'm walking into." "Emma," James said, realizing she was closing up. "But you know what I do know?" Emma continued, her voice growing stronger. "I know how to make someone smile when they're having a bad day. I know how to work hard for what I want. And I know how to recognize someone genuine when I see them." She turned to Isabel. "And you, Isabel, what do you know how to do besides wear expensive dresses and put other people down to feel important?" Isabel was speechless for a few seconds. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," she finally said. "But guts won't be enough when reality hits you." "Maybe not," Emma agreed. "But at least I won't spend my life being bitter because someone I wanted chose someone else." This time, it was Isabel who turned red with anger. "James," she said, grabbing her purse, "when you're done with this social experiment, call me. I'll be here." She left the room, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume and tension. Emma dropped into the chair, feeling like she had just run a marathon. "I'm sorry," she said. "I think I messed everything up." "Are you kidding?" James sat beside her. "You were amazing. I've never seen anyone stand up to Isabel like that." "She wasn't completely wrong," Emma admitted. "I really don't know how to use a fish fork or talk about French art. And I don't know how to make brigadeiros or chat with kids in the park," James said. "That doesn't make either of us any less valuable." Emma looked at him and saw honesty in his eyes. "Do you think your grandmother will accept me?" "I think my grandmother will love you," he said, taking her hand. "Because you're real, and because you make me smile." That night, Emma lay on the large bed, staring at the ornate ceiling. Tomorrow, she would meet Margaret Carter and have to convince her that she was the right woman for her grandson. The problem was, she was starting to believe it might be true, and that scared her more than any confrontation with Isabel. Margaret Carter arrived on a sunny Saturday morning, driving herself in a black sedan that looked older than Emma. James had warned her that his grandmother was independent, But Emma hadn't expected to see an 83-year-old woman step out of a car, carrying 2 suitcases and refusing any help. "Grandma, at least let me carry that," James said, rushing to meet her. "My arms work just fine, thank you," Margaret replied, though her voice held warmth. "Now, introduce me to this young woman I've heard so much about." Emma stepped down from the porch, wearing a simple navy blue dress and trying to steady her nerves. Margaret Carter was exactly as she'd imagined, small but commanding, gray hair in a neat bun, and blue eyes that seemed to see straight through people. "Grandma, this is Emma Martinez," James said, placing his hand on Emma's back. "Emma, my grandmother, Margaret. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Carter," Emma said, reaching out a hand. Margaret studied her for a few seconds before ignoring the handshake and pulling Emma into a hug. "None of this, Mrs. Carter business. Call me Grandma Margaret, like the rest of the family," she said, stepping back to get a better look at Emma. "So, you're the young woman who managed to tame my impossible grandson." Emma laughed nervously. "I'm not sure I tamed anyone. I think he might have tamed me." "Oh, she's clever," Margaret said to James. "I like her already." Over lunch, Margaret asked about everything: Emma's family, her studies, how she met James, and her future plans. Emma answered as truthfully as she could, leaving out only the details about bets and make-believe. "So, you sell sweets you make yourself?" Margaret asked, slicing her grilled salmon. "Yes, I learned from my mom when I was little. It's a family tradition," Emma said. "It's not very glamorous, but it helps pay for school." "Glamorous?" Margaret laughed. "Dear, I grew up on a farm. I used to wake up at 5 the morning to milk cows before school. Honest work is never something to be ashamed of." James watched the exchange between the 2 women with an expression Emma couldn't quite read. It was something close to hope. "James told me you lost your parents when you were very young," Emma said, turning to Margaret. "I did. He came to live with me when he was 8. He was a stubborn, proud little boy, always trying to prove he could do everything on his own," Margaret said, looking at James fondly. "Some things never change." "Grandma," James protested, blushing a bit. "What? It's true. You still struggle to accept help or admit you need anyone?" Emma looked at James, recognizing something in the description. She had trouble accepting help, too. After lunch, Margaret suggested a walk in the garden. Emma was nervous, but James discreetly took her hand, giving her a quiet sense of reassurance. "You've got hands that work," Margaret noted, noticing the gesture. "I like that. Hands that make things always have good stories." They sat on a bench near the central fountain. Margaret closed her eyes and turned her face toward the sun. "You know, Emma, I was worried James would end up single and bitter," she said suddenly. "He's always been so focused on work, so controlled. But ever since he started talking about you, there's a lightness in him I haven't seen in years." Emma felt her heart speed up. She looked at James, who was watching the fish in the fountain with a thoughtful expression. "He's a good man," Emma said, realizing she meant it. "Sometimes I think he hides behind work because he's afraid of being let down." "Very insightful," Margaret nodded. "And what about you? What are you afraid of?" The question caught Emma off guard. "I'm afraid of not being enough," she admitted. "Of always reaching for something just out of my grasp." "Ah," Margaret said gently, taking Emma's hand. "Dear, if James chose you, it's because you are more than enough. He may be stubborn, but he's no fool." That afternoon, James suggested they cook dinner together. Margaret insisted on helping, despite his protests. "Grandma, you should rest." "Nonsense. Cooking is relaxing. Besides, I want to see how you 2 work together." The mansion's kitchen was bigger than Emma's entire apartment, with professional appliances she barely knew how to use. But when James started chopping onions and Margaret began preparing spices, Emma felt at home. "James, you're cutting those onions like they're diamonds," Emma said, taking the knife from his hand. "Let me do it." "I do know how to chop onions," he protested. "I know you do. But you're making the pieces too perfect. For a stew, they should be a little uneven." Margaret watched the exchange with interest. "She's right, James. You've always been too much of a perfectionist, even in the kitchen." As they prepared a simple stew, Margaret's choice, Since she said she was tired of chef food, Emma noticed how much James relaxed in the kitchen. He laughed at Margaret's stories about his childhood, made fun of his own limited cooking skills, and seemed genuinely happy. "Emma," Margaret said while seasoning the stew, "can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "Do you love my grandson?" The question dropped into the kitchen like a bomb. James stopped chopping carrots and looked at Emma, waiting. Emma felt her face grow warm. How could she answer that? Technically, it was all pretend, but the feelings she had developed for James were very real. She began, then looked at James and decided to be honest. "Yes, I do." Something changed in James's expression when she said that, a mix of surprise, relief, and something else she couldn't quite read. "And you, James?" Margaret asked. "Completely," he said without hesitation, still looking at Emma. "I'm completely in love with her." Margaret clapped her hands. "Wonderful. Now let's finish this stew before it burns." But Emma could hardly focus on the food. The way James had answered, the tone in his voice, the way he kept looking at her, there was something there that went far beyond pretending for the sake of a sick grandmother. During dinner, Margaret shared stories about James as a child. How he used to build imaginary businesses with toy blocks. How he always stood up for the smaller kids at school. How he would surprise her when she was feeling down. "One time, when I was sick with pneumonia, he sold all his toys to buy flowers for me," Margaret said. "He was 9. He said flowers would help me get better faster." Emma looked at James, who seemed slightly embarrassed but smiled. "I still like giving flowers to people who matter," he said, looking at Emma. After dinner, they sat in the living room. Margaret said she was tired, but Emma noticed she was still quietly observing how she and James interacted when they thought no one was watching. "Well," Margaret finally said, standing up, "I think I'll head to bed. It's been a long trip." She kissed James on the forehead, then walked over to Emma. "Thank you for dinner," she whispered in her ear. "It's been a long time since I've seen my grandson this happy. You're good for him." When Margaret went upstairs, Emma and James were left alone in the room. The silence between them was heavy with everything that had been said during dinner. "You lied to her," James finally said. Emma felt her stomach sink. "About what?" "When you said you love me," James said. "Because if it was a lie, it was the most convincing lie I've ever heard." He stepped closer. "But if it was the truth?" Emma looked at him, her heart pounding. "What if it was the truth? Then everything changes," he said, now standing right in front of her. "Because I wasn't lying when I said I'm in love with you." This time, when he leaned in, Emma didn't pull away. The kiss was gentle at first, hesitant, as if they were exploring unknown ground. But when Emma kissed him back, deepening the moment, James pulled her closer. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "Is this real?" Emma whispered. "As real as anything I've ever felt," James said, resting his forehead against hers. And for the first time since it all began, Emma wasn't wearing any kind of mask. Emma woke up on Sunday with a strange feeling in her chest. The kiss from the night before had changed everything between her and James. But it had also made things more complicated. She was pretending to be engaged to a man she was actually falling in love with, and she no longer knew where the acting stopped and the real feelings began. She went downstairs to the kitchen and found Margaret already up, sipping coffee and reading the newspaper. "Good morning, dear," the older woman said. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, thank you." Emma lied, pouring herself some coffee. "You're up early." "Old habits." Back on the farm, we always got up with the sun. Emma sat at the kitchen table, a smaller, cozier table than the formal one in the dining room. "Can I ask you something?" Margaret said suddenly. "Of course. Are you two really engaged, or is this just an act for a sick old lady?" Emma nearly dropped her coffee cup. She looked at Margaret, who was watching her with those sharp blue eyes. "I don't know what you mean." Margaret chuckled softly. "Dear, I raised James. I know all his expressions, every little gesture. And you two are trying too hard to look like a settled couple." Emma felt her face grow warm. "What do you mean?" "Couples who've been together for months don't look at each other with that mix of longing and hesitation. They don't touch like they're still discovering how, and they're definitely not surprised when the other says, 'I love you.'" "Of slacks." Emma looked down at her cup, unsure what to say. "But you know what?" Margaret went on. "I don't mind. You two may be pretending to be a couple, but the feelings are real. You can't fake the way you look at each other. Mrs. Carter. Margaret." She corrected. "And there's no need to explain. James must have his reasons for putting on this act. It probably has to do with his habit of trying to solve everything on his own, but I can tell he really cares about you." Just then, James walked into the kitchen, hair tousled and wearing a casual t-shirt. "Good morning," he said, heading straight for the coffee machine. "Are you two already up to something?" "Just talking about women," Margaret said innocently. "Emma, you should tell him about that offer you got." Emma's eyes widened. "What offer?" "Oh, right," she improvised. "The offer?" James turned, alert. "What offer?" Margaret smiled at Emma, clearly enjoying herself. "I'll leave you two to talk. I'm going to walk in the garden." After she left, James sat beside Emma. "What offer?" he repeated. "Your grandmother was testing our dynamic," Emma explained. "She knows. James. She knows we're not really engaged." James sighed and ran his hands through his hair. "I figured she'd find out. She's always been sharp. So, what now? Will she expose us?" "No. If she thought this was completely fake, she would have already confronted me. The fact that she's joking about it means she sees something real between us." They sat in silence for a moment, sipping their coffee, thinking over the conversation. "Emma," James said finally, "about last night, the kiss." "Yes," Emma replied, her voice cautious. "It complicates things." "Why?" "Because now I don't know what's real and what's pretend, and that scares me." James turned to face her fully. "Emma, I'm going to be completely honest with you. Last night was real. Everything I felt, everything I said, it was real. But what about later, when your grandmother leaves and we don't have to pretend anymore?" "Who said anything about pretending?" Before Emma could answer, James's phone rang. He looked at the screen and frowned. "I have to take this. It's my lawyer." He left the kitchen to answer, leaving Emma alone with her tangled thoughts. 15 minutes later, James returned, looking troubled. "We have a problem," he said. "What kind of problem?" "My family, not Grandma, the others, my uncles, cousins, the company board. They found out about our engagement." Emma felt her stomach sink. "How?" "Isabel. She told everyone she knows. And now they want to meet you officially." "What does that mean?" James sank into the chair. "It means they'll want birth certificates, information about your family, your education, your financial situation. They're going to look into everything. And when they find out I'm just a poor girl who sells sweets, they'll push me to break off the engagement," he said quietly. "They'll say you're after my money, that you don't fit into the family." Emma stood up abruptly. "So that's it? The act ends here?" "Emma." "No, James. I won't go through the humiliation of being investigated and judged by people who don't even know me. And I won't cause trouble for you with your family or your company. They don't matter to me." "But they should," she interrupted. "This is your life, your family, your business. I'm just a temporary actress in this story." James stood up and gently held her arms. "You're not temporary. Not to me. How can you be sure? We barely even know each other. Strip away all the lies and pretending. What's left? A few awkward dates and 3 days of playing a couple? It's about this," he said, pulling her closer. "It's about how I feel when I'm with you. How you make me laugh. How you challenge me. How you make me want to be a better man." Emma felt tears burning in her eyes. "And what if it's not enough? What if your family is right, and we really are from 2 different worlds? Then we'll build our own world." Before Emma could respond, Margaret appeared at the kitchen doorway. "Sorry to interrupt, but I just got an interesting call," she said with a serious expression. "It seems your cousin Robert is coming over this afternoon, James, and he's bringing a few other family members. They want to meet Emma officially." James muttered under his breath. "Grandma, I can explain." "No need to explain anything," Margaret said, surprising them. "But the 2 of you need to decide one thing. Are you going to face this together, or let others decide your future for you?" Emma looked between James and Margaret, feeling the weight of the decision. "How much time do we have?" she finally asked. "About 4 hours," Margaret replied. "Then," Emma said, taking a deep breath, "we'd better start preparing our story. The real one this time." James smiled for the first time since answering the phone. "Are you sure?" "No," Emma admitted. "But I'm going to try anyway because you were right about one thing. What I feel for you is real, and that's worth fighting for." Margaret clapped her hands. "Excellent. Now let's make you two look like a couple that actually knows each other. And Emma," she added, "just be yourself. If they don't like it, that's their problem, not yours." As they prepared to face the Carter family, Emma wondered whether she was making the biggest mistake or the best decision of her life. Maybe she'd find out in a few hours. At 2 o'clock, 3 black cars pulled up in front of James's mansion. Emma watched from the bedroom window as sharply dressed men and women stepped out of the vehicles with serious, determined looks. "They look like they're coming to a funeral," she muttered. "In a way, they are," James said, appearing behind her. "They came to bury our relationship." Emma turned to face him. He had swapped his casual clothes for a dark suit, slipping back into his CEO posture, but there was something different in his eyes, something that looked a lot like determination. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" she asked. Smoothing the simple blue dress Margaret had insisted she wear. "I've never been more sure of anything." The doorbell rang, and Emma felt her stomach twist. "Let's go," James said, offering his arm. "Time to meet the vultures." In the living room, 5 people were waiting for them. Robert Carter, James's cousin and the company's vice president, was a man in his 42nd with graying hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Next to him was his wife, Linda, a thin woman wearing oversized jewelry. There were also 2 of James's uncles and an older woman whom Emma assumed was Aunt Clara. Margaret was already seated in the main armchair, watching the family with an amused expression. "James," Robert said, standing up, "good to see you. And this must be the famous Emma." "Emma Martinez," she said, extending her hand. Robert shook it a little too firmly, clearly trying to intimidate her. "So, Emma, tell us about yourself. James has been very private with your personal details. What would you like to know?" Emma asked, sitting beside James on the couch. "Well, to start, where did you study?" Linda asked, pulling a little notebook from her purse as if she were taking notes. "I'm studying culinary arts at Manhattan Community College," Emma answered honestly. "Community college?" Robert repeated, as if the words left a bad taste. "And your parents? What do they do for a living?" "My mother is a widow. She's been a seamstress her whole life. My father died when I was 16. He was an electrician." The silence in the room was awkward. Emma noticed the glances exchanged between family members. "And you work selling sweets on the street?" asked Aunt Clara, her voice dripping with disdain. "I work 3 different jobs to pay for school and help my mother. Selling sweets is just one of them," Emma replied, keeping her voice steady. "3 jobs?" Linda murmured, making a note. "And when would you have time for the responsibilities of a CEO's wife?" Before Emma could respond, James stood up. "That's enough," he said, his voice slicing through the air. "I won't let you interrogate Emma like she's some kind of criminal." "James, dear, we're just trying to understand," Robert said, feigning innocence. "After all, this is a very unexpected match." "Unexpected?" James laughed. But it was a cold laugh. "You know what's unexpected? Finding out my family is even more prejudiced than I thought." "We're not prejudiced," Linda protested. "We're practical. You have responsibilities, a social position to uphold. You can't just marry anyone." "Anyone?" Emma's voice rose. "Excuse me, I have a name, and I'm not just anyone." "Of course not, dear," said Aunt Clara in a condescending tone. "But you must understand our concern. James will inherit the family company. His wife will be held to the same standards." "And what standards are those?" Margaret asked. Suddenly speaking for the first time since the meeting began, "Because I remember when this family didn't have 2 pennies to rub together." "Grandma," Robert murmured. "Don't grandma me," Margaret said, as she stood, leaning on her cane. "Have you all forgotten where we came from? Your grandfather, Robert, was an Irish immigrant who arrived here with nothing. I grew up on a farm, working since I was 5. None of us were born into this luxury. But that was a long time ago, Linda argued. Things are different now. Are they really? Margaret looked at Emma with warmth. Because when I look at Emma, I see the same thing I saw in myself at her age. Determination, courage, and the kind of humility that comes from knowing the value of hard work. With all due respect, Grandma Margaret, Robert said, times have changed. The company has responsibilities to shareholders, a public image to maintain that. The company is doing just fine, thank you, James cut in. And my personal life is not up for board discussion. Your personal life affects the company when you're the CEO. Robert shot back. Then maybe it's time I reconsider my role as CEO. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma looked at James in shock. James, what are you saying? She whispered. I'm saying that if my family can't accept the woman I've chosen, then maybe I've chosen the wrong family. Robert turned pale. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious, James said. Taking Emma's hand, Emma makes me happy. She challenges me, makes me laugh, makes me want to be a better man. And if you can't see that, then the problem is yours. James, Emma said softly, you don't have to do this for me. I'm not doing it for you, he said, turning to face her. I'm doing it for us, because I've finally found someone who means more to me than any company or family approval. Linda stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. You're going to throw everything away over a whim? A whim? Emma stood too. Her patience finally gone. You've spent the entire afternoon judging me without even trying to get to know me. You've decided I'm not good enough because I work for a living and wasn't born into wealth. Emma, Robert tried to cut in. No, let me finish, she said, her voice growing stronger. You want to know who I am? I'm someone who gets up at 5 the morning to work at a bakery before school, who sells sweets on weekends to help pay my mom's medical bills, who's worked hard all her life knowing every opportunity had to be earned. She looked each of them in the eye. And you know what else? I'm someone who makes James truly smile, who knows him, without the expensive suits and fancy titles, who loves him for the man he is, not for what he owns. You love him? Margaret asked, smiling. With all my heart, Emma replied without hesitation, looking at James. Even when he's stubborn and controlling and thinks he has to fix everything on his own, James smiled. That real smile that completely changed his face. And I love you, he said, for your courage, your honesty, your strength, for making me feel like I can truly be myself. That's very touching, Robert said dryly. But love doesn't pay the bills or keep a company running, doesn't it? Margaret laughed. Robert, you're a fool. Love is exactly what makes the best companies work. Passion for what you do. Care for the people involved. Strong values. She stepped closer to James and Emma. And if you two really love each other, then I have just one question. What is it? James asked. Margaret pulled a small velvet box from her purse. Why haven't you done this properly yet? James looked at the box, then at Emma, who looked completely caught off guard. Grandma, this was your mother's ring, James said, opening the box to reveal a vintage diamond ring, simple but elegant. She told me to give it to you when you found the right person. James took the box with trembling hands and turned to Emma, who now had tears in her eyes. Emma, he said, dropping to one knee right there in front of his shocked family. I know we started this in a strange way. I know we still have a lot to learn about each other. But I also know that you're the best thing that's ever happened to me. He opened the box. Will you marry me, for real this time? Emma looked at him, on one knee in front of her, then at Margaret, who was smiling proudly, then at the rest of the family, still staring in disbelief. James Carter, she said, smiling through her tears, are you really proposing in front of the people who just spent an hour humiliating me? I am, he said, smiling too, because I want everyone to know I choose you. I will always choose you. Emma held out her left hand. Then yes, 1,000 times yes. James slid the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her, a deep, passionate kiss that made Margaret clap and left the rest of the family even more stunned. When they pulled apart, Emma looked at the ring on her finger. It was perfect, not flashy, but meaningful. "Well," Robert finally said, his voice stiff. "That was unexpected." "James's whole life has been unexpected," Margaret said cheerfully. "And look how well he's done." Linda closed her little notebook. "I suppose. If this is truly what you want, James." "It is," he said firmly, wrapping his arm around Emma's waist. "And I hope you can respect that, Robert. Welcome to the family, Emma. I hope we can start fresh." "I'd like that," Emma said, surprising everyone with her grace. After the family left, promising to consider everything that was said, Emma, James, and Margaret sat in the living room, still taking it all in. "So," Margaret said, "when's the wedding?" James and Emma looked at each other. "Well," Emma said, "since we just got really engaged 10 minutes ago, maybe we should think about it." "How about next weekend?" James suggested. "Next weekend?" Emma's eyes widened. "Why wait?" He took her hand. "We already know we love each other. We already know we want to be together. So why wait?" Margaret clapped again. "I love it. A simple wedding, just close family and friends." Emma looked at the two of them, feeling like her life had flipped upside down all over again. "You two are crazy," she said, but she was smiling. "Totally crazy," James agreed, kissing her again. And for the first time since it all began, Emma wasn't pretending to be someone else. She was being exactly who she was, a hard-working girl who loved her family, who wasn't afraid to fight for what she wanted, and she was about to marry the man of her dreams. 1 week later, on a Saturday afternoon, the garden behind James's mansion had been transformed into a dream setting. Margaret had insisted on organizing everything herself, and the result was simply magical. Emma looked out the bedroom window, wearing the wedding dress Margaret had worn 50 years earlier, a vintage gown made of delicate lace with 3/4 sleeves and a subtle train. Clara had made small alterations to make it fit perfectly, and the result was breathtaking. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," said Maria Martinez, her mother, adjusting the simple veil in Emma's hair. Clara appeared in the doorway, wearing a lavender dress as maid of honor. "Emma, it's time. And you? Oh my goodness, you look perfect." James was waiting at the altar, standing next to the officiant. He wore a navy blue tuxedo and couldn't stop smiling. When the music began, he looked toward the house, and his whole face lit up. Emma stepped onto the porch, holding a simple bouquet of white roses and taking a deep breath. Her mother stood at her left side, and Clara to the right, both supporting her at this most important moment. As she walked down the petal-covered aisle Margaret had arranged, Emma felt like she was floating. Every eye was on her, but the only gaze that mattered was James's. He looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world, and Emma felt tears of joy fill her eyes. Halfway down the aisle, her mother whispered, "Your father would be so proud." When they reached the altar, Maria kissed Emma's forehead and placed her hand in James's. "Take good care of her," she said softly. "With my life," James replied, kissing Maria's hand. The officiant began the ceremony with simple but heartfelt words about love, commitment, and the journey Emma and James were starting together. When it was time for the vows, James pulled a piece of paper from his pocket. "Emma," he began, his voice slightly unsteady, "I wrote and rewrote these vows 20 times, trying to find the perfect words. But the truth is, there are no perfect words to describe what you mean to me." He looked straight into her eyes. "You've taught me that being vulnerable isn't weakness, it's courage. That laughing at yourself is freeing. That real love isn't about being perfect, but about accepting and celebrating each other's imperfections." Tears ran down Emma's face. "I promise to support all your dreams, even the crazy ones. I promise never to try to change you, because you're perfect just the way you are. And I promise to love you every day, not just on the easy days, but especially on the hard ones." When it was Emma's turn, she didn't need a piece of paper. The words came straight from her heart. "James, when we met, I was trying to be anyone but myself, and you were the first person who made me want to take off all the masks." She held his hands tightly. "You taught me I can be strong and vulnerable at the same time, that I can dream big without losing my values, that I can trust someone without losing my independence. I promise to be your partner, not your shadow. I promise to challenge you when you're being too stubborn, and I promise to love you, not for what you have, but for who you are when no one's watching. When the officiant asked if they accepted each other as husband and wife, they both answered yes, with steady voices full of emotion. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. The kiss was long, full of passion and silent promises. The guests broke into applause and joyful cheers, but Emma and James barely noticed. They were lost in their own world. When they finally pulled apart, James whispered in her ear, "Hello, Mrs. Carter." "Hello, husband," she whispered back, laughing. The reception was small but perfect. Margaret and Maria hit it off right away, sharing family recipes and telling embarrassing childhood stories about Emma and James. Clara gave a hilarious speech about how she was sure Emma would drive James crazy within 6 months. Even Robert gave a respectful toast, admitting he might have judged Emma too quickly. By the time the night ended and the last guests had left, Emma and James sat together on the garden swing, still in their wedding clothes, looking up at the stars. "So," James said, playing with the ring on her finger, "how does it feel to be a married woman?" "Scary," she admitted. "Happy, hopeful, and still a little confused about how we got here." "Me too," he laughed. "But I don't regret a thing." "Neither do I," Emma said, leaning against him. "Not even the ridiculous disguises." "Especially the ridiculous disguises," James agreed, kissing the top of her head. Months later, Emma graduated with honors and opened her own bakery, Emma's Sweets, in a charming spot in Greenwich Village. The business took off quickly, drawing loyal customers not just for the delicious treats, but for the warm energy Emma put into everything she did. James had found a better balance between work and life, especially after Emma convinced him to bring on a partner to share the company responsibilities. They traveled together, cooked together, and James even learned to make a decent brigadeiro. One spring morning, Emma was in the bakery's bathroom, staring at a positive pregnancy test with her heart racing. She and James had talked about having kids, but always as something for the future. Apparently, the future had arrived. That afternoon, she closed the bakery early and spent hours planning how to tell James she wanted it to be special, something he'd always remember. When James came home, he found the dining room lit with candles and a beautiful dinner waiting. "What's the occasion?" he asked, kissing her. "I just wanted to do something special for my husband," Emma replied, trying to hide her nerves. During dinner, she was visibly anxious, and James noticed. "Are you okay? You seem nervous." "I am," she admitted, "because I have something to tell you." She got up and went to the kitchen, returning with a small box wrapped in blue paper. "A gift?" James asked, curious. "Open it." Inside was a tiny blue baby shoe and a note that read, "Daddy, I can't wait to meet you. Love, Baby Carter." James looked at the shoe, then the note, then at Emma, who was smiling with tears in her eyes. "Emma, are you pregnant?" he asked. "It's a boy. I'm 8 weeks along." James's face went through a whole range of expressions. Shock, joy, amazement, love. Before he stood up and pulled her into a tight hug. "We're really having a baby. We're having a baby," she confirmed, laughing and crying at the same time. James kissed her deeply, then knelt down and kissed her still flat belly. "Hi there, little one," he whispered. "It's Daddy. I can't wait to meet you too." Emma ran her fingers through his hair, feeling a wave of love so strong it almost knocked her off her feet. "Are you happy?" she asked. James stood and looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "Happy, Emma? I'm over the moon." "Scared, but over the moon." "I'm scared too," she admitted. "But I know we're going to be good parents." "The best," he agreed, placing his hand gently on her belly. "And if this baby is even half as special as their mom, we're the luckiest people in the world." That night, lying in bed and making plans for the future, Emma thought about how much her life had changed since that first crazy meeting. She'd started out trying to get rid of a man and ended up finding her soulmate